Welcome to the Kabn Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of Kabn culture. We like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how Kabn lovers, dwellers, builders, and designers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. Today, our guests Charlie and Amber take us across the Atlantic to Loch Fyne in Scotland, where their luxury off-grid cabins offer an idyllic escape just meters from the shore. With their roots stretching from London to Dubai to Edinburgh, Charlie and Amber found initial success with their first cabin and have since both left full-time jobs to expand what they're doing and create a more retreat-like experience. Join us as we explore the unique entrepreneurial challenges and rewards of establishing a cabin business in the heart of Scotland's breathtaking landscapes. From the inspiration drawn from safaris to the innovative approaches in sustainability and guest hospitality, this episode promises to be both inspiring and enlightening. Let's do it. Okay, let's back up a little bit because people can probably already tell immediately from your accent that you might not be located in the US. So why don't you start by introducing yourself and telling us where your cabins are located?
Sure. So my name is Charlie. Obviously, we're based in Scotland. We set up the cabins about a couple of years ago on Loch Fyne. Loch Fyne's about an hour from north of Glasgow and 2 hours west of Edinburgh. And it's a really pretty location. It's just on literally about, 10 meters from the loch shore, so it's right on the water's edge. And we are about 2 kilometers down sort of a private estate track. So the estate that we're on is a really lovely, infamous, old sort of 12,000 acre estate and beautiful scenery. And we're just sort of the end of the track, really.
Do you live there? Do you live in one of the cities? What is your proximity full-time to where the cabins are?
Yeah, good question. So we live in Edinburgh. So we actually moved up during COVID. So the whole kind of thing kicked off during COVID and we moved up here during COVID. We were intending to originally set this up, ironically, in the US. So we had plans to go to California, had it all kind of laid up. And then visa processing went on the massive halt during COVID. So we just thought, sod it, let's go for it up here. So we've been sort of here since. So we're based in Edinburgh and it's a beautiful city. We're very fortunate to live here. It's kind of antithesis of living, and we lived in Dubai in the Middle East for 3 years before that. And then before that we were in London for sort of 10 years. So it's really refreshing to be in kind of what feels like quite a small town city. It's really lovely.
Yeah. Where are you from originally?
From just the home counties near London, so about an hour and a half. Both of us from an hour and a half south of London, basically. Okay,
and then you went to the Middle East, and then you went to Edinburgh.
Yeah. So exactly. So we met at university in London, so we both went to London, and then joined the corporate rat race. I used to work in reinsurance. Was an underwriter for a number of years, and then Amber was a lawyer, so working for US law firms, ironically.
Okay, so this is what I was looking for, is the connection to California. Is that why? Because Amber, potentially you could work over in California and then also develop this at the same time? Or what was the appeal to California to start the whole cabin adventure?
I used to travel there a lot with work, and I just have really fond memories of being in San Francisco. And the thing is, in America, it's much easier to scale a business. The networking and capital side of things make things a lot easier, and obviously the sheer size of it. Once you execute on a good idea, it's much easier to scale a business. We'd found a really lovely organic farm about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. We were going to lease land from. It was really it was a dreamy spot. We're actually going to do more of a luxury tented kind of aesthetic. So reached out to the manufacturer, the guy who did a lot of the high-end tents in South Africa, who's actually, I think he did the Amangiri tented extension. So we're kind of going to use that as our base. But decided, after visa processing stopped, to just focus and get going on this stuff. But the connection with the law, I mean, you can talk. You were actually going to stay in the industry.
So I was actually going to stay in law for longer, and I took and passed the California bar exam, so I was going to work as a lawyer in California. I think the US is so different in terms of the way people connect with each other compared to the UK. I think the UK, and this is obviously a massive generalization, but oftentimes people can be quite closed off. They don't want to share the connections. There's a very different feeling around being entrepreneurial and success in the UK. And I think in the US it's just so there's such a positivity towards being successful, towards doing your own thing. And when you see someone who's successful, thinking, how do I get to be as successful as that person? Whereas in the UK, I've always found there's not that same kind of revered success. It's more, how did you get that? Why you, not me? It's a bit of a different attitude towards success over here, I find. But and also I just love the way that everyone likes to connect with, it's all about how can I help you? What are you doing? How can I share my connections? How can I be useful to you? That's really like noticeable in the US and less so over here.
This is so interesting to hear from the outside because I've only grown up here and run businesses here, and was going to ask about the short-term rental industry in general in the UK versus here, but didn't even think to ask about just the entrepreneurial landscape, how it might be different in the UK versus here.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to broad brush the entrepreneurial spirit of the UK, but it's just, I think, especially Amber's always wanted to live over there, and I think, obviously being a lawyer and doing debt finance, you got a really good role lined up in San Francisco. It kind of made natural sense to go there, especially because we had an affinity for the area. But no, I mean it's also the scaling of things, right? Like the US is huge comparatively, so I think that opens up and the fact that in the US you guys tend to go to college in one place and then live somewhere completely different, and then everyone kind of bounces around a bit more, and there's a kind of more spread network. Whereas in the UK, people tend to stay in London for the most part. So yeah, I mean, I think most of our friends and family are still all living around or in London. So it's just interesting to see the different dynamic, really.
Yeah. Did you choose, the next piece I want to get to is how you got into starting this business. And did you choose the location that you're living now because of the dream for this business, or did this business come from your move to that location? When did it start?
No, very much so we weren't really thinking of living up in Scotland, but we'd already found the site for Loch Fyne beforehand. So we kind of got things going, got the ball running with that, got planning in place for that. And then I think everyone during COVID reassessed their kind of situation, circumstances. And I think we were living back in London at the time, just for a sort of short stopgap whilst we were waiting for the US stuff to come through. And we just I don't know, we've always had an affinity for it. Edinburgh's stunning, and we just thought, let's just go for it.
We came over quite a lot when we lived in Dubai. We used to visit Scotland fairly regularly because we wanted like a dosage of fresh air and greenery and hills, and it's just got so much of that and more. So we used to love flying over, and Charlie's uncle lives here and has done for many years. So we used to come over and see him, and I think we were always just blown away by the accessibility to really beautiful landscapes and scenery. Like within an hour of Edinburgh or Glasgow, you can really feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. And yet you're not really in the middle of nowhere. It's just it's such a cool feeling. And then when we had the opportunity during COVID with remote work to move up here and base ourselves up here, it just made total sense. And now we don't know how we ever lived in London, really.
Yeah, exactly. And just, even 30 minutes from Edinburgh, you can see beautiful scenery. And it's we're very lucky, and there's so much opportunity up here to put hospitality products in really beautiful positions around the country. And we just saw so much opportunity up here. So that was kind of the catalyst for the U-turn from going to the US to up here. It's just it offers breathtaking scenery, relatively limited population, so you feel like you're on your own very quickly. And the transport hub's fantastic. Like the number of daily flights from Edinburgh even to the US is way more than you'd think. Glasgow's an incredible network. Emirates fly to Glasgow, which opens up the world. Qatar fly to Edinburgh, which opens up the world. And you've got, 30 odd daily flights to London. And of course, the train between London and the up to Scotland is incredible. Really fantastic and so frequent. So it's a fantastically positioned place. So we see lots of opportunity up here, really.
Isn't that the interesting thing about picking a location is that, especially for cabins, you want something remote and that feels remote. That feels like a core tenet of cabin culture. And yet you also want something accessible enough that people don't feel totally isolated and people from multiple cities can all have access to it to just guarantee that it's easier to fill those dates.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's amazing. So it's been really interesting to see, because you kind of never know 100% who's going to come stay in your product, right, and what the makeup of that is. But about 80% of our business comes from UK-based people, so people having staycations. And I think, again, people realise that there's quite a lot of beautiful stuff on their doorstep, especially, again, in light of COVID, when travel restrictions meant that people couldn't really go too far. They looked to home turf for vacations, and I think that kind of trend is probably set to continue. And it's easy, right? It's so much easier to kind of jump on a train or jump in a car to go somewhere a couple of hours away rather than trek halfway across the world.
Right. It's interesting. It took a dip, like in 2020, at the end of 2021, and you could see people were like, okay, I can travel internationally again. But then very quickly, it wasn't much of a dip and it rebounded. It might be shorter stays. It might not be like a week-long vacation that you're investing in.
Yeah.
But you learned during COVID that actually there's a lot of value in traveling close by for just a weekend and creating that kind of vacation feel only an hour or two away.
Yeah, exactly. I think the whole space is really interesting. There's, as you know, because you're in the depths of it, there's a whole movement getting away from it all, really. And I think everyone has deep down this kind of feeling of wanting a kind of cabin in the woods type experience, or in a bit of an escapism, especially when we're getting all more addicted to technology and yes, spending time being plugged in. I think there's a whole, it's amazing to see the whole movement of these kind of these cabins are popping up across the world, really. Yeah. It's really interesting.
And the growth of businesses like yours, I think, back in the day before this most recent wave, it felt like cabin in the woods was a very rustic experience.
True,
and what you would expect from that is you got to be okay with bugs, and you got to be okay with not being able to sleep that well. And that's, and I grew up camping and that's what we did. But now, and this is kind of ties into your business model, this more premier escape. You can still get away without having to love bugs, without being okay with more rustic living conditions, and creating a premier vacation experience in the woods that you can have the best of both worlds.
It's so true. I mean, where this all kind of stemmed from really was we were very fortunate enough to go to we usually spend all of our earned income on holidays and experiences. We've just always done that. And we adore safaris. They're just our favorite type of holiday. And a lot of this stemmed from being able to go to some amazing, wonderful camps across Africa and India. And these guys, they've been doing hyper luxury boutique hospitality in nature for 30, 40 years, even probably longer. And so they kind of opened our eyes to this possibility of putting a really cool structure in a remote place and making it work. Yes, they have game to go and view, but I mean, this is why Scotland's so exciting, because it's just wonderful wildlife and nature to see. So you can kind of hopefully, we're hoping to replicate that type of experience going forward in beautiful parts of Scotland, because it's so visceral and it's just, it's a wonderful feeling to be in nature, staying in somewhere in luxury and to kind of take it all in. Also, I think it helps as well, opens people's eyes to sustainability and to regeneration and understanding what's on their doorstep, and that we need to sort of protect it, and a good way of protecting that is always ecotourism. So I think it's it's a super interesting space.
Yeah. Okay. I have so many questions about that we're going to dive into. I will say the thing when I was reading the reviews that made me literally look up flight tickets to see okay, we could start saving up for this one. Should we come? Was the seals that came in and were just on the ground and you could see them right outside your cabin.
Yeah, they're really cool. That's a resident colony, and actually, it's really regular. You see them the whole time, and we've had guests who've been out kayaking and paddleboarding, and they come up. They're quite inquisitive, so they always want to kind of see what you're doing, which is quite cool.
Yeah.
Literally my dream. Sea mammals are my favorite animals. So in all that, I was this is not something I've seen in the US at any of the cabins that we've looked at or talked to. This is truly unique.
Yeah, okay. They're super inquisitive. It's really cool, actually. They so they kind of live about, 40 meters away from the cabins, and they're just they're very inquisitive, so they kind of just mosey around. They look pretty chill. They tend to like lie on these big rocks and wait for the tide to drop out, so they just kind of just float there, and then the tide goes out and they're just lying on these rocks sunbathing. It's kind of sweet. They're quite big as well, they're surprisingly big.
That I couldn't tell from the photo. I couldn't get a good sense of scale of like how large is it, like a small little seal or like a large seal?
we got a fox red Labrador, and he tends to sort of swim after them, and then they all kind of like gang together and swim towards him, and he kind of quickly evacuates. When they're about, I don't know, probably 3-4 times the size of the dogs, so they're pretty chunky.
This is the kind of content that keeps me on Instagram, literally. Like that, my picture of that video is like why I'm still on the internet.
Well,
okay, I was going
to say there's another thing we can touch on as well, is it's the whole world of social media, the sort of pros and cons of it, because it's so powerful and so important for marketing, but also just it's a little overwhelming at times.
Yes, I have lots of questions for you on that too, especially because it doesn't appear that you use any hosting platform, so you do almost entirely direct booking, which then makes social media almost a necessity because you don't have someone marketing for you. But first, before we go there, I have lots of questions about that. But I want people to get like an idea of like, right now you have 2 cabins, correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But I have a sense from your website and just from what I've heard from you so far that the vision is larger than that. So can you kind of like share with people, what is the vision of Kabn Company? Where is it now and where is it going?
Yeah, sure. So currently, we wanted to prove concepts. So we built the MVP, which is our 2 off-grid cabins on Loch Fyne. We've been running for sort of nearly a couple of years now. And we wanted to self-fund and kind of bootstrap that all ourselves, just to show that we can do it. And it's been fantastic. We've been at sort of 90+% occupancy rolling for the last 12 months.
So that's pretty good feedback.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We've had about a 15% repeat booking rate, which is just awesome considering we've only been open such a short space of time, really.
Right.
And we've managed to achieve a relatively high rack rate for the area and also for the product. So we charge £250 a night, which is kind of at the upper end of the kind of like cabin market or the bracket. But we do offer a lot of inclusions within that kind of nice amenities and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, the vision really is to now that it's been proven, is to grow a network of these off-grid cabins across Scotland. There are beautiful locations everywhere. They're kind of in abundance. We're very lucky to have that. And there's 2 sort of prongs to the growth. One is to carry on with these 2s and 3s of cabins. So build a network of these. Very much, we'll improve the current product through just lessons learned and design features, etc.
Yep.
And then our goal is to create a retreat, so a very hyper luxury boutique retreat in nature, very much leveraging on the kind of safari-based experience that we've had, and putting these beautiful structures, light touch, again keeping on the sustainability and regeneration side. And finding a really lovely location where we can have a 10 to 12 room retreat with a big clubhouse, which will act as a social space so people can connect, talk about their day. Very much, again, like a safari tent where everyone just gets together and chats about what they've seen during the day. Because we feel like connection with both humans and nature is really important, and be able to talk to each other and not be stuck on these things. Because far too often you go to a hotel lobby, especially if it's like anywhere really, but like if we're just away, we were just traveling around Vietnam, and we were staying in a really beautiful property, but everyone is just on their phone. Like no one's taking in the view, and it's almost frustrating. So we kind of very much want to encourage like connection and getting off these things. So the goal is to create that. That's what we're really working towards. Creating this boutique retreat. And finding.
I love that.
Yeah, it's super needed up here. I mean, it's just. Yeah, there's nothing really like it. You have really big hotels like kind of Glen Eagles, and Trump has a couple of big luxury hotels here, and they're just Goliath. They're sort of 300 plus rooms. They're very nice, and they're for a certain type of traveller. But what we want to do is try and create something really special, and to really get guests to kind of embed themselves in where they're staying and to make them feel very connected to nature. So
Yeah. Have you heard of Pure Pods in New Zealand?
I have. So ironically, I researched them donkeys years ago when I was trying to put together the MVP and kind of business plan for this.
Yeah.
They're the ones with the glass, kind of atrium, right? Yeah. Again, awesome model. So I think they do it predominantly on farmers' land when I looked. And they sort of lease farmers' land, put the pure pods up, and it's a
an interesting shared revenue model. We interviewed the CEO on the podcast because I stayed there when we were in New Zealand for a couple nights. And I thought the business model was really interesting. The cabin itself is interesting too, but the way they do it is a very different approach from most people I talk to here in the US are buying land.
Yeah.
And so then there's a certain barrier to entry, which may or may not be, something that you came up against where people want to build a cabin, but it's like, but I have to be able to buy land and pay to build it. And there's like a lot of overhead. So it's interesting how they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different ways you can kind of expand.
I think the leased model is more popular in Europe as well. Same with Unplugged, with Rouse, and Yoked as well.
Unyoked as well,
like the rev share or leasing land. But yeah, it's a great way of doing it if you want to not have the high kind of upfront capital cost of buying the land. But then the downside is raising finance when you're leasing the land is always more difficult than if you own the land and the cabin.
Yeah.
So that's one issue.
For sure.
I haven't heard of anyone leasing in the US, so I don't know anything about that, even in terms of like, how do you move the cabin if whoever owns the land starts like hiking the rates up on the lease, what do you do? Are you stuck there? Because you've actually built a structure on it.
Yeah, I don't know. Have you chatted to the Getaway guys? Is it Getaways? Because I think they got like 700 kind of small movable cabins. I think they do
own land there.
Do they own the land?
Okay. I think so. But I guess the nice thing is that because the cabins are prefabricated off site in a warehouse, they were transported up to site on the back of a lorry and then craned in. So and
that's how yours were brought in?
Yeah, and the foundations are removable. So everything, like in theory it would be a pain in the ass, but we could lift it up and take it out, and I think that's the same with the Unplugged and Rouse. They're even more movable.
Yeah, I think they sit on like a steel chassis which you just put wheels on and they move them made to be. I mean, I think they work on like a moving bait, like they move them sort of every set period of time. Or I know Rouse started out that way, where they kind of they started on leasing like farmers' land and then moved them every sort of 30 days or something to get around.
So interesting.
Well, it's just to get around the planning stuff, right? So they could get going, I think, and to get going. But no, we kind of wanted to make it more of a semi-permanent structure. So we went to kind of the effort of building like a structure that would last sort of 70 plus years rather than sort of 10 years, and was built to kind of house like standards and to make sure that every sort of element that we put in there was, we went to a lot of effort of speccing out the kind of sustainability side of things. So.
Well, one of the questions that came up for me when I stayed at a Pure Pod was this idea, this tension between high-end, like premier experience and off-grid, right? Yeah. Because there are certain restraints, like just by nature of like, please don't take a shower more than 5 minutes. I totally understand that from an off-grid experience. And if you're paying $400 a night to stay somewhere in this beautiful shower with all these windows, you might want to take a 10-minute shower. How do you all think about that in terms of sustainability and being off-grid while also creating like a really luxury experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So ironically, you mentioned the 5-minute thing. So Emirates first class showers, they have a 5-minute timer on them. So people in a luxury product, they used to, they can dumb themselves down for a shorter time period. Jokes aside, we made sure that the cabins felt premium in themselves. So having like a full rain shower and flushing toilet was really important to us. That being said, we made sure that it was done in a sort of most sustainable fashion as possible. The septic solution that we installed to enable us to have like a proper flushing toilet was made from recycled coconut husk. It treats the outflow as extremely pure because we're very close to a oyster farm, ironically, which is about sort of a kilometre down the road. So we had to make sure that the output of what we're putting out was to the right standard, and we managed to find a very good sustainable product. But I think it is important if you're going to try and have more of a premium product to have a flushing toilet and running shower. And again, harking back to the safari stuff. I mean, they've been doing that. I mean, everywhere we stayed out, they've had flushing toilets and running showers. Of course, you've got to be.
It's all been off grid.
Yeah, and it's all been off grid. Sorry. And it's really And going back to the off grid stuff, I mean, we have 15 solar panels, which power a battery bank, and the battery bank lasts I mean, at this time of year, it's like fully charged by about 9 o'clock in the morning. It's amazing. And yeah, obviously lasts throughout the day. And we only have to run, we have a backup generator for winter. So between middle of November through to middle of February, it has to come on for about 20 minutes a day. But again, we get through very little diesel for that period, and the rest of the time it's all solar, which is amazing considering as well we're on the west coast of Scotland, which is notorious for having quite cloudy weather more often than not. And yeah, it's actually opened my eyes to how, and technology is only getting better with that stuff, right? We could supplement it with wind. There's a small stream that runs up the hill. We could even put a small hydro scheme on there, so one could have almost unlimited renewable power throughout the year. And we made sure that the cabins, like you can plug in your iPads and your laptops and your and anything that you want, your hairdryer. So you're not restricted about what you can do within it. We do ask people to like be cognizant of what they're using. And we're actually going to start implementing giving guests like a feedback after they stay of how much energy they've used.
Fascinating.
Just to make them aware of like just out of interest as to what solar we generated for the period and what consumption that they used. Because we can track that, which is cool. It's almost become a bit.
Oh my gosh! And for someone who's competitive, if you let them know at the beginning that they're going to be getting that data, here's the average. You're going to get your data at the end. I feel like that would be so effective in getting people to be like, okay, we got to be careful of what our number is.
It's so true. I mean, yeah, I think I would be like that too as well. But yeah,
and that feels different. That feels different to me than like you cannot use a hairdryer. Like the one in New Zealand, there was no hairdryer provided. You were not allowed to use one. There was no plugs. They did a good job on the flip side of educating. Here's why this is important, which made me feel like, okay, I really wish I could blow dry my hair, but I understand why. On the flip side, this isn't like punishing anyone or like taking things away. This is just incentivizing them to be conscious, which is also a habit that they could take with them back to their life and be like, well, now I want to know what kind of energy I'm using at my full-time residence.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point you mentioned actually, is the idea of hospitality and cabins and where you stay on holiday having more longer term impact on behavior and changing people's way of living.
Right.
I was speaking to someone the other day and we talked about it's like almost demoing living a more sustainable life. And there are like a number of takeaways you can then go and implement when you do go back home if you choose to.
Yes.
So it's a really nice way of like thinking about how can you actually have more than just an impact on site where you are, but a longer term impact on behavior change.
Yes. I love thinking about that. Pete, who designed Cozy Rock, and I have talked about this in the past of how luxury, because like my cabin at Cozy Rock is like a little bit nicer than I personally would prefer. Like I would prefer something a bit more rustic, but for guests, like you can charge more and people expect that. But we talk about it as a stepping stone. Like what if we get people who have only ever stayed at hotels and then they come to a cabin, right? Because they're like, well, this feels like a hotel. But then they come and they spend more time outside than inside. Maybe next time they would consider a more rustic cabin, maybe eventually glamping, maybe eventually they'll pitch a tent and sleep outside under the stars, right? Like how do we get people to like fall in love with this way of life when it might not be the way they were raised or their instinct? And so same thing, right? Like how do we get people who maybe aren't eco-conscious at all right now to be thinking at least a little bit about sustainability and the impact they're having?
It's true. And I think the key is like not to bully or brainwash someone into being like, you have to be like this. You don't have to like, right. I think you we're all individuals and all have our own like thought processes. I think it's really bad when it's hammered into you. Like you feel bad about, I think there's a subtle way of doing it, and leading by example is one of those things. And also saying that you're not perfect yourself, I think is quite important. I mean, we have we have like a home truth section on our website about all the negatives of staying, or not negatives, but like the downsides. Like you expecting a sandy beach, it's a pebble beach. There might be, there might be the odd car that goes past in the distance that you might hear, or there are a number of different things that we kind of say that like, the generator might come on for 20 minutes in the winter during the day. We're not sort of perfect, and I think it's important not to, especially when we talk about the environment stuff, to hammer too much on at people to make them feel really uncomfortable. I think you just have to try and do the best that you can, select the right.
That's right. That doesn't inspire change. I was vegan for 8 years and I learned very quickly I never wanted to be that vegan who like was preaching about what they ate and why they did it. But inevitably at every meal, people would be like, so why are you vegan? And it would be like, I really don't want to talk about it. But then I saw someone who was vegan and what she created for her family with her kids and her husband was the vegan game, where like different food choices had different amount of points based on basically the impact on the environment or the animals. And then the least amount of points you had, you would win. So every week they would like tabulate their points and it became like a game. And it wasn't a game like if you eat meat, you're out, right? It's not like an all or nothing type game. It's just a, like every time you eat something, think about what you're eating and like if it's worth that amount of points or whatever. And I really liked that from it's not black or white. It's okay. We know this is better. Let's just eat less of it. Let's use less of this, electricity or whatever, and work towards minimizing our impact.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. That's the key. Because no one, unless you're Greta Thunberg, you can't really be completely perfect. Sorry,
that's our dog in the background.
Our dog's having.
Dogs are welcome. Yeah.
He does these like weird dreaming.
Wait, that's a dream? He's dreaming right now? He's probably dreaming about the seals at the loch.
Yeah.
Literally. And when they started chasing him.
Yeah. Okay. So take me back to, you came from careers in the corporate world,
yep.
And then you started this business. At what point did you both make the leap and we're like, okay, we're all in, we're leaving our careers. This is what we're doing next.
Yeah, that's a good question. So mine, for me, it was, I was living in Dubai at the time. And we've always been absolutely passionate about hospitality and loved kind of staying at various different properties, but always focusing on like boutique properties in landscapes that we admire. So across like Japan, Bhutan, India, Africa, and we've stayed at these like wonderful remote properties. And yeah, it's just always been a passion of ours, and we've always talked about it. Whenever we stay somewhere, we always kind of like critique it and think how we could do it better. Think what we'd want to implement.
Yes,
to the
relatable.
Point, yeah, exactly. To the point where it's like it does become kind of like an obsession, but like it's kind of what we're passionate about, and it's what we really enjoy. And yeah, we came up with kind of the concept, as I said before, for doing a luxury kind of safari experience in California. At the time, there wasn't anything there. There was like collective retreats and under canvas, but they weren't doing a super premium product. It's great. It's lovely to be in sort of beautiful, it proves concept of glamping. But what we wanted to do was like hyper boutique and hyper luxury. But as I said, so I quit to work on that kind of like venture. I'd done the research, done the marketing, done the numbers. It all made sense.
Because at this point, Amber was going to be still working in law in the US. So you had like one stable salary and you were like, okay, I'm going to go do this.
Exactly. That was the, Amber was taking off the team, and that was the financial backup.
We both were in careers which were all about like risk mitigation. So like, I think that had a big impact of like, I'll stay working and like supporting us for a bit while we get
not a bad plan. That's a pretty good plan because you hadn't proved it yet. At the point that you've proven it, it's much easier to throw it all out and be like, let's go for this. But before that, it can be really scary.
Yeah, I literally analyze and underwrite risk for a living. Like that was my, ironically on US based risk for the most part. But yeah. So anyway, so we basically it all made sense from like a business perspective. There was a need for it in the market, and we were super passionate about it. And we just hadn't managed to save up enough savings to get going with like an MVP. Dubai's great in the fact that we didn't pay tax, so it was a really good place to kind of save some money, save some capital for this. And yeah, we just got going with it. So we then, as it went down the US route, and then as soon as that started to like not pan out, just because of like COVID and stopping of visa processing, we just went straight to our next favorite place, now our most favorite place, which is Scotland. And as I said before, the abundance of beautiful scenery, access to incredible network links, for transport, and just generally the feeling of like being up is fantastic. Like it gives you a really raw, visceral feeling, being kind of shrouded by beautiful nature and not having to go to kind of like northern Alaska to get that same feeling. It's fantastic. So
So that's when Amber left? You left your job as well?
No, Amber's...
I left so last year. I've been, last April, I think it was.
Okay, so you hung on a little bit longer until they were up and running and generating revenue. Because that's the tricky period.
Yeah.
Like Charlie, you made the decision to go all in. You kind of need someone full-time who can manage the build, the setup, all of that.
Exactly, especially because it's so capital, building anything is capital, like the amount of expenditure up front is so high. So it's not like tech where you can you can quite quickly make revenue or income quite quickly. Whereas, properties can be quite slow, especially when you're waiting for planning and permits and all that sort of stuff.
Everybody listening can relate to that, I feel.
We were quite fortunate in the fact that our planning came through really quickly. So our planning came through in about 6 weeks. They loved the environmental side of things that we were focusing on, and the fact that the structure was obviously movable. And we managed to build the actual structure in about 3 months. So
you built it yourself?
Well, as in we hired a team to build. Yeah, I didn't build it myself.
Okay, I didn't know how much you had played in the design and build of it.
So we hired an architect to put together designs for it. So we worked on 2 different designs for the different locations because we didn't want a cookie cutter approach. So one's in kind of more of a landscape orientation, the other one's in a more of a portrait orientation. And we went around and researched manufacturers, found a prefabricated manufacturer who worked in cross-laminated timber. So CLT is this wonderful, it's very thick material, structurally, bless you, structurally very, has a huge lifespan, and it means you can also retain a lot of the heat that you produce within the cabin. So it's a wonderful material to work with. So we were focused on having a cross-laminated timber structure. So that limited the prefabricated manufacturers that we'd go to tender with to reach out to. Anyway, we landed on one. The exoskeleton was put up in, the shell of the structure was put together in a day, which is pretty cool. It's just the fit out that takes longer because we were working during COVID and everyone had to work in these kind of bubbles. So, sort of 2 to 3 people in a team at a time, which added some delay to it. And then we brought them up on the back of a lorry and installed them with a big crane and got going really.
If you're dreaming about a cabin build or are in the midst of a build, or you just bought a place and are getting ready to host for the very first time, regardless of where you are, sometimes you just need a little help along the way. Shared experiences from someone who's been there, advice from someone who's learned a lot of lessons the hard way. That's me. Or a cheerleader as you finish up. All of these reasons are exactly why I started offering cabin consultations to our Instagram followers and friends who could use some specific one-on-one help. I can't promise to solve all your problems, but I can promise to be transparent about our build costs and process, our organization and project management systems, our favorite and least favorite tools for renting, how we market, and how we found ourselves with almost 80,000 Instagram followers and 100% occupancy in our first year of hosting at Cozy Rock. So if that sounds like it might help you, feel free to visit us at staycozycabin.com or on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin and sign up for a time to chat there. So the next thing I want to ask you about is, because if anyone, and we're going to drop some photos in here too, and all the links to your website, et cetera, are going to be in the show notes. But for anyone who hasn't seen it, the cabin feels very high end. It feels minimalist, but luxury. So that obviously, when talking about a premier rental versus just your average cabin rental, I think that's a huge part of it, what people see in pictures and what they experience when they're there. But I think there's a second piece that isn't talked about as often, which is premier hosting. So once it got dropped on that land and it was time to start hosting guests, how did you think about the luxury side of it from hospitality and not just physical space?
Yeah, really good question. So I think luxury can be defined on many different levels. I think setting, place and setting is quite important, especially with a rural property. First and foremost, so having a beautiful location. So we're on the waterfront, we're 10 meters from the water along a beautiful estate. I think that in itself is even if we pitch a tent there, it feels like a luxurious tent pitch. And then sort of working back from that around the sort of design and stuff, we were limited to size because in the UK, getting around under a certain size helps with the planning and regulation side of things. So we're about 300 square foot, so it's not a big structure. So we wanted to make it feel as premium as possible by making sure that the interior and the products that we chose were very thoughtfully chosen. So the bedding that we have is, I mean, the duvet, the mattress that we have is made by Natural Mat, who supply like Six Senses and they're Hoxton and they're wonderful, all organic, all recycled materials.
And showed up in several of your reviews. So people commented on the mattresses, which I feel like is a notable thing because that's an easy one to like, just kind of be like, I'm going to get a middle of the line mattress. But when people sleep well, like that is notable.
It's true. And I think I talk about trying to build like a brand and separate away from just like an Airbnb listing. There are so many like city-based Airbnbs, even in Edinburgh, which are like run by management companies. They use crap like linen. The duvets all like feel very old. The bedding's like 400 years old, and I understand why. They're just trying to make as much money as possible from the experience. And there's no one who's really kind of caring that much behind it. It's just like a unit economics thing. But yeah, no, I mean the bedding's like one example. I mean our duvet is made from recycled plastic bottles. It's super snuggly. The factory that makes it's net zero. The lady that runs it's really lovely. The sheets that we use are all organic, fair trade from Dip and Doze. I mean, just every element of the bedding side of things we thought about. Same with like the towels and all that sort of stuff. Having a flushing, it sounds crazy, but in an off-grid cabin, having a flushing toilet and a rain shower is luxury in itself. We have a heated towel rail, so you can, dry your stuff, and then just little things like we provide loads of organic coffee beans, all the herbs and spices that you could ever imagine, all organic. It's just really annoying when you go and stay in an Airbnb and you've got like some old salt and some like pepper that hasn't been touched in 400 years and maybe half a bottle of olive oil, which you're not even sure if it's olive oil. We supply
totally. I am totally guilty of this. Like if you go to my cabin, this is what you'll find. I have not figured out a way to like keep that fully stocked. So I'm like, I think you're right. I think that is luxury hosting. It sounds simple, but having spices, salt and pepper, fresh olive oil, like is luxury. How do you manage all of that? Do you all do all of that?
Having like a really long checklist for our pool cleaners, I think is one thing. It's really important to get good cleaners who kind of care, and we're very fortunate to have found a couple, even in a rural location, found a couple of fantastic. And yeah, they were a bit bombarded when they first started with my insanely long and retentive checklist, but it's super important to make sure that it's like done to a standard that you'd want to stay at. If you're going to stay in a Four Seasons or a Marn hotel or even any luxury boutique hotel, you expect a certain level of standard, and I don't think it's impossible to bring that across to self-catered properties. And we certainly wanted to implement, despite being in a rural location, various elements of that. And even just down to like having a knife sharpener and having sharp knives the whole time. Yeah. It's so annoying when you go and stay somewhere and it's got like really blunt knives. We always ask the cleaners to sharpen the knives and just to make sure that everything's always topped up to the full. And I think just little things like that, aside from the setting and the place, you can make a product feel more premium than it is. I mean,
there's also there's like the soft side, right? Like even in a luxury hotel, obviously there's the hard product, but it's actually the service, the interaction you have with the people behind the brand. That's really important, and we have a WhatsApp concierge where people can reach out either during their stay or before they stay. Or after their stay if they want, with questions, or if they want to do something, we'll help arrange it. So almost like like concierge, but we're not a hotel, but we're kind of semi-hotel. And I think
do you manage all of that, the two of you?
Yeah, and I literally every guest uses it. They're like, I can't find like, I don't know, the coffee grinder, or I want to go on a boat tour, or where's a good restaurant, or
they a taxi. Or...
Yeah, I need to get a taxi, or can you help with this? Or it's heavily used, and I think half the reason why it's heavily used is, sounds very basic to say, but like we reach out to every guest before they stay. They get the kind of standard automated emails that everyone gets, but we also reach out with a personal WhatsApp, which is tailored to their stay, where they put like a little note on there or a little request. And that's like a really nice soft touch point. And people are so much more likely to interact on WhatsApp because it's, it's very casual.
It's also the way we all communicate,
and it's also,
so much of the time, right? We always
exactly.
you talk to friends. It's more. It feels informal and relaxed, like you're having a conversation almost with someone. And I think we do it ourselves now. Obviously, the more cabins we have, the harder that's going to be to do. But I do think it's really nice having a human behind it who's responding in a kind of personal way. Because the risk with going to like an automated platform, it's just that you lose that kind of personal touch.
And that's where when I see people in like Airbnb groups complaining about reviews, I'm like, I think you're obsessing about the wrong thing. If you obsess about reviews, you're like doing it backward. If you instead obsess about how you're hosting people and being available to them, you're like never going to have to worry about the reviews. And that's what I noticed in your reviews, how many people mentioned you by name, which told me that you had to be communicating with them one-on-one, because that's where it builds the relationship. And they're like, Charlie made this stay amazing. Highly recommend Amber, was so helpful in doing this, right? And you like see that, and then you know that interaction is happening. To me, that feels like almost the most important part of luxury.
Yeah, it's really true actually. And you forget how much you lean on kind of like concierge and the check-in experience, etc. in nice properties, or like even just a turn-down service. And we can't offer any of those things because we're not there in person, but we can do it some with some respects virtually. And I think just being there. And we're super responsive. Like that's the other thing I think we probably pride ourselves on. That's basically our old jobs. We had to be super responsive and reply almost instantly to most things. So I think we've kind of taken that across and realized the importance of being on, even if it's just an email inquiry about like, can I stay next year? And replying instantly is just so nice, because far too often it goes into a big hotel inbox and you have to wait like 24 to 48 hours and get some like rather unpersonalized response. And I think being on top of all that stuff is like really important. And as we grow and expand, we make sure to implement all of these things. And I think just going back to the sort of like luxury side of things, like we the first like year or so, we've been very generous with all the stuff that we provide in the cabin. So we provide really lovely like complimentary firewood, and we made sure that the firewood that we use is like super easy to light. It's from a sustainable source, and is like kiln dried, like high quality. Everything's always topped up. We provide, charcoal, like really nice high quality charcoal. And we've just invested in some like green egg barbecues, which is fantastic. Yeah, it's really nice.
And people were mentioning that in their reviews.
I know, it's so funny. I said, Amber and I were laughing about that the other day, because it's like, we don't even know when. They're expensive, right? And it was like we had to, have a good year to kind of think about investing. We've always kind of wanted one, but we've just been bootstrapping and like iterating the product and reinvesting all the time, basically, to make sure that the experience, despite not being like super, super, super hyper luxe, that we can try and make as many of the soft touches as nice as possible for guests. Yeah. And that includes, like, as I said, just supplying good charcoal, like even not these like anyway, just little things like that. I think is really important. And
I do not think that can be overlooked. Even the wood that you're providing, I think the ability. I stayed at under canopy, whatever that one is. For a wedding I was shooting, they had the whole thing there, and there were only 3 matches in there, and unfortunately I couldn't get the fire lit with those 3 matches, so I slept cold all night. And I'm like, this is such an easy problem to solve. Like, put more matches or put better fire starters so someone can get it started on the first try. And the amount that impacted my one night experience there is like significant. But what a small thing. As a host, like, I'll pay for a full book of matches or put it on my cleaning list for the cleaner to check that you have more than 3.
Yeah, exactly. Literally, we kind of go overboard with that. Like, we then have like spares under the sink just in case, and we have like an extra lighter just in case of that. We kind of do try and think of things like the nth degree with stuff like that.
Okay, so I think the last thing that I want to ask about is, because you're, I think, all or primarily direct booking, from the very beginning, how did you start thinking about like, okay, how are we going to get the word out? How are people going to know that we exist and start booking if you don't have a platform like Airbnb or VRBO?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I think from the outset, we always wanted to control the guest experience from start to finish and be kind of responsible for the touch point from the very start to the very end. So we never really looked to be on a hosting platform for that exact reason. And also it means you get higher stickiness and more retention of the kind of guest experience and guest kind of interaction going forward. So in order to enable that, I think you need a couple of things. I think you need a good website, or a clean, easy to book website. And I think that's really, really important. So again, we've bootstrapped that. I built that myself. It's just, the kind of crappy website builder. But I think that was really important, is to have a good booking and easy to use website, and to be really clear in your communication on there, show what the product is and have a very detailed FAQ, and make sure that you present the product as clearly as possible. And that goes also with the actual accommodation itself, and to make sure you have an abundance of photos. But again, even that, we couldn't afford to get a photographer at the time, so we kind of bootstrapped that whole. So the first original photos I had, the original ones I had were just my iPhone, trying to.
Okay, well, clearly not anymore.
Yeah, and then obviously social media is super important, and we tried to present ourselves in a certain way. It's hard without having a big marketing budget to get good photographers in, and to get them to kind of shout for you, and to take good photos and good content. We haven't done a single paid stay to date, and we're quite conscious of that, because again, we're trying to create quite a genuine organic brand. So we want a lot of the stuff to be word of mouth, or at least presented in a way that feels very organic in growth. And yeah, I mean, I think it's to be found, and we rank really well for off-grid cabins. That helps too. And it's quite like a niche, but we, for luxury off-grid cabins and off-grid cabins, I think we're number 1 or number 2 for the UK, which really, really helps us out. Could
that be because of how much press you've gotten? I'm looking at your website, and it's showing BBC, Hidden Scotland, The Herald, Marie Claire, the Scotland Times. You've been featured in a ton of places.
So that, it's funny, because again, it's a completely different vertical for us, an industry to learn. We now have quite a good idea of how it all works, but that's all cold outreach. Amber was just cold outreaching to press guys, and to saying, hey, interact with them, and to try and have an angle that they can actually ride on. But yeah, again, it'd be lovely to have a really expensive PR retainer and have them do it all, because it's a big pain point. We both hate the outreach, and also hate spending too much time on social media, to be honest with you. But it's so important.
It's important if you want to get direct bookings.
Exactly.
Right? If you're okay listing everywhere and paying the booking fee, and if you're not creating a brand as such, then it doesn't matter as much about doing it that way. But for us, we do want to. So we've been conscious about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, you seem to have done a really good job, because when I was on your website, I was like, this is probably the most publications I've seen listed on a direct booking site like this before. And so it's interesting to hear that Amber has done a lot of cold outreach, because I feel like a lot of the people listening, we don't talk about this at all on the podcast, because it's not something I've ever done, and I haven't found many people who've done much of it. But all you had to do is just reach out to folks and send them just who you are and what your story is, and then they would follow up if they were interested.
Yeah,
is that simple?
Exactly. And also it's kind of one of those kind of almost online speed dating kind of things, like Instagram. If you find out who wrote an article about some other nice property somewhere, and then you follow them, and then you send them a message, and then it becomes it's quite like that. You kind of force it a little bit. And same with the email addresses. Sometimes their email addresses aren't listed, so then you can have to make up various iterations of whatever organization they're working for, first name, last name, all that sort of stuff, to try and get through. But yeah, it's kind of old school hustle in some respects. But it's super important, and it has helped as well. And the other thing as well is, once you get picked up by one relatively good medium outlet, you're then verified in that kind of world. So then you're more likely to get picked up either again in a future year by the same outlet or by someone else. So that very much helps. So when you get a good article in, I don't know, Condé Nast, then that's nicely verified by someone, then someone else will pick it up. And it helps massively with obviously SEO ranking. So all the backlinks to all the news articles have helped tremendously.
Which probably explains why you're the number 1. If you look up off-grid cabin Scotland, because of all this press, that would lead me to believe that your SEO is probably doing quite well.
Yeah, it is. And that's something actually we haven't done a good job at, the whole blog writing, article stuff. We really should do. It's just a function of time and effort. And I kind of want to put, I want to put genuine material out there rather than just using ChatGPT to splurge out a bunch of stuff.
Right.
So, which is doable and would help massively with ranking. But again, it's trying to have the time to create kind of genuine, interesting content for people. But we don't have a blog side of things. We kind of use Instagram for that as our yeah. And we haven't used. We've put a couple of TikTok videos up, but that's totally my fault again. It's just a function of we're not there to take content the whole time, and I just want to focus on one medium for the time being because I don't have the bandwidth really to kind of go on across all the platforms. We don't have enough content for it because we don't have people going there. It's a nice problem to have, but we're full with like paying guests rather than freebie Instagrammers. And that's the way to, if we had to do it all again, we'd start more with like the free stays. But I was so conscious from a business perspective about making profit and to be profitable year one that I kind of refused a lot of free stays because I wanted the business to work from a financial point of view first. Right. There's a little chicken and an egg, and there's definitely a fine line between getting the right people, spending the right sort of dollar on that stuff. But as I said today, I haven't paid anything to have anyone to stay.
Which is interesting. You're the second in a row. The last week's podcast episode said the same thing, and they're building very similar here in the US, but building very similar, or actually they're in Canada, concept. And they said they haven't done anything that hasn't been a free trade, which is so interesting because I have paid for so many photographers and I don't regret that. And some of them, it's like you're paying because they have huge followings of the people that you want to come stay. So it's like, it's not just the photos, it's getting in front of their audience, and the people following them will repost or share or learn about you, right? So it's like, I don't regret the investment at all. And I also think it's tricky for me because I do video production full time. And so for me, pitching free stays to people is a really hard ask because I get pitched all the time for exposure. Can you do this for free for exposure? And I do it full time. So I'm like, no, I have to pay my bills. So asking someone to do it for that, it's so tricky. But also if it's win-win, someone wouldn't say yes if they couldn't do it, right? So it's like, if that makes sense.
It's definitely a big pain point, especially for all of us that are trying to drive more direct bookings and to try and, grow your own presence organically. Right. But yeah, as I said, it's hard. Like if you're getting, like $700 for a couple of nights stay and you're going to fill those dates, it's sometimes really hard to justify filling it with someone who might or might not produce on the quality of aesthetic that you want. And also then sometimes the reach that they have is it's a difficult space. Sometimes you can do a lot of diligence, but you never know as well, like if they post something or produce something that their audience will actually even want to see it.
That's right. And I mean, the most recent quote that I got from someone was, I think, like $2,500 for 30 images and a 2-night stay included in that. So for us, a 2-night stay, lost revenue for me is like $500 to $750, depending on the season, plus that's $3,000 for 30 images. That is $300 per image.
But the thing is, like, you obviously have an aesthetic, you're a videographer yourself. You presumably, it's just the reach that you're kind of paying for, really.
Right.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. And
wait, I did the math wrong. $100 per image, is that right? If it's $3,000,
either way,
it's a lot per image.
Look, if you're a big brand or you have a big like budget, I think there's definitely like a place for it. I just think it's hard when you're trying to bootstrap or you have a couple of properties. It's hard, especially now. Like, I mean, iPhones are amazing. I know it's not the same finished aesthetic as like a fully like nice expensive $5,000 camera. And also aesthetic is really important, like how you present your brand. And that's something that I think going forward will make more of a conscious effort to portray a better, consistent sort of brand imagery and brand feel, like tones and,
I feel like you're doing a really good job of that. The most impressive thing to me when I went on your website was you have a slider that lets you take a photo and you can slide it to the left to see what it looks like in the morning and to the right to see it at night. I have never seen that before. And I am absolutely obsessed with that. It's just, it's interactive, it stands out, and it gives you a real view of what it feels like to be there.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, I would like to get like a nice 3D, like a really high quality, almost kind of CGI feel 3D like walkthrough. So everyone knows literally exactly what they're getting. I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple. There's a cool cabin company, I think, in California. I can't remember the name of it, but they've got a wicked CGI walkthrough, and it's so cool. You can see exactly kind of what you're getting.
Well, even a good videographer could do that, though. Like with a gimbal and a camera, you can do like a good walkthrough video that would actually show them what it looks like.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But no,
I mean, honestly, with an iPhone and gimbal, that's also part of the reason it's harder for me to justify paying for it now, is because all the content I shoot, I don't anymore. I don't ever bring my professional cameras to the cabin ever, because it's an 800 square foot cabin. Like, I'm not going to store all my shit there. But also an iPhone 15 Pro on a gimbal that costs $100.
Yeah.
For Reels. I mean, that's where we're getting a lot of our reach, is through Reels, right? And Reels prefer content created on the iPhone. They want everything to be like native to the app. So it like,
well, it's really interesting. And like, again, who knows with like consumer science? I'm not a marketer and haven't spent any time ever in the marketing world other than with this business, really. But it's fascinating to see, like, I think lots of times people they like a room to look like a tiny bit messy, like lived in. They don't want that kind of super immaculate, like aesthetic. Yeah. Even like the high end, like hotel brands, when they're, getting like these influencers to come stay, they want it to look a bit lived in. And I think they want someone to feel like they can be comfortable in the space. And I think rather than having like a super clean cut, everything's immaculate, like perfect angled video, I think having the kind of more, in some respects, rustic video sometimes works. But it's certainly an area I think we would like to improve on and try and get some some expert like advice to help us out, because we're coming just purely from a gut feel, Googling background, really, and without sort of any real knowledge set behind it.
But this is the story of any like individual couple or just an individual who's starting this kind of business, like the life of a solopreneur is you're doing everything all of a sudden. And some of it, for example, risk mitigation, I'm sure you were very good at and knowledgeable at from the beginning. You probably have great insurance on your cabins and have thought through like how to keep everything safe, right? But you can't be the master of that and of social media and marketing. And so it's like, it's so hard to do all of them until you get bigger and have more revenue and can pay other people to do it. But man, that growth is hard when you're doing everything.
It is, especially when it goes wrong, right? But I think wearing all those different hats is the really exciting bit. It's the bit that kind of makes you feel like you're doing your job. And also like the learning curve is exponential on that. Whereas in your whatever career that you're doing before, you're kind of, the learning curve sometimes gets quite stagnated quite early. So this is, throwing yourself in the deep end at every different element is, it's I think it's exciting. We're super stoked to kind of get going with the next one.
So that's my last question, is what can we expect next from you?
So we're working on like iteration 2.0, so same size footprint cabin, but like just a more premium, more luxury feel interior, more thought out. Just because there's always lessons learned, right, from user feedback, also just from our own feedback. So that's kind of what we're working on, and then further ahead, we're still trying to work towards this dream of creating a kind of proper retreat in Scotland. So sort of 10 to 12 cabins, like luxury hyper boutique hotel, basically. Light touch in terms of like staffing and also footprint, but yeah, that's the goal.
Nice. Well, everyone, tell folks where they can find you, but I'm also going to be putting all of this in the show notes. So if you're listening while driving, don't worry about looking them up now. You can find it there. But why don't you tell folks where they can find you? Sure.
So the company is called Kabn. That's spelled Kabn. And kabncompany.com is our website. But yeah, if you just Google Kabn, you'll find us, awesome defunct cryptocurrency, which is called Kabn back in the day. So you'll find us that way.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share. It's such a treat. Anytime we're talking to folks in different countries, I always enjoy hearing about cabin culture, and in this case, entrepreneurial culture and what's different between the countries. So thank you for taking the time to join me.
No worries.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for joining us. And if you liked what you heard, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or share some of your favorite parts over on Apple Podcast. If you have feedback or suggestions for the future, you can also find me on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin. Looking forward to next week.